Some people may lose their lives through the most trivial accident, while others overcome the most amazing obstacle and manage to survive. The following event is about a 17-year-old girl who fell out of the sky and lived to write about her ordeal. Julian Kopko was born in Lima, Peru, to German parents who were both scientists. When Julian was 14, they established a research station at Panguana in the Amazon rainforest. Julian firstly grew up in the jungle and learned survival techniques. The educational authorities disapproved her upbringing in the jungle and forced the parents to send her to a German school in Lima, where she graduated in 1971. Her mother, Maria, wanted Julian to return with her to the research station in late December 1971, but Julian wanted to stay one more night to attend the graduation ceremony. The next flight was scheduled for Christmas Eve. However, the only flight they could get was with Lancer, but her father urged them not to fly with that company as they had a terrible track record. But they did not heed his warning and took the flight nonetheless. It would be on this flight where Julian's life would take a dramatic turn. As they were flying, they looked out of the windows and observed that the plane had entered a very dark cloud, and although her mother was anxious, Julian was not concerned because she liked flying and had no fears. But the weather turned severe when they hit extremely heavy turbulence, where the plane started to jump around, causing the lockers to fly open and releasing all of the luggage. Julian then became anxious herself when they saw lightning around the plane. Normally, an aircraft accident due to lightning is rare, where the electricity flows through the wiring and exits the tail of the plane, where the exterior is like a shell that protects the people inside. But this did not seem to be the case in the Lancer Lockheed that they were flying in. Julian and her mother held hands and were so frightened that neither could speak. Then other passengers started to cry and scream. About 10 minutes later, a bright light then struck the outer engine on the left side of the plane, where Julian claimed that her mother calmly said to her, "That is the end. It's all over." Those were the last words that Julian's mother ever spoke, as the plane then went into a nosedive. It was now pitch black, and all Julian could hear was people screaming and the roar of the engine. All of a sudden, the noise stopped, and Julian now realised that she was outside the plane and in a free fall. But she was still strapped to a seat and hanging head over heels. 1 minute she was hearing the roar of the jet engine, and then the only noise she heard was the wind as she was plummeting to earth. 1 second she could see the jungle spitting towards her, and then she lost consciousness, remembering nothing of the impact. The following day, Julian awoke surrounded by the jungle canopy and thought to herself, "My God, I survived an air crash," and then felt totally alone. She then screamed out to her mother, but all she could hear was the sounds of the jungle. As she started to move, she found that her collarbone was broken, and she had deep cuts on her legs, and her right eye was swollen shut. She realised it could have been a lot worse. After all, she had just fallen out of the sky. As she started to move, she found she'd ruptured a ligament on her knee, but found she was still able to walk. Fortunately for Julian, she did not panic at the thought of being in the middle of a jungle. Because of her previous years as a child living in the Amazon, she had learned much about the rainforest, and that it was not the hellish environment that many people believed it to be. However, she still needed to be on her guard. Julian could hear the rescue planes overhead, but because the jungle was so thick and she had lost her glasses, she could not see them. Unfortunately, Julian was not dressed for the occasion and was wearing a very short sleeveless miniskirt and white sandals. To make matters worse, she had lost one of the sandals and had to use the one sandal to test the ground as she was frightened of encountering snakes. She was fortunate enough to come upon a small creek and use the creek as a pathway where she felt safer, and she had also learned from her father that following a stream should eventually lead her back to civilization. Although she had water, she had no food and was afraid she was going to starve. The conditions were now extremely hot and wet as it was constantly raining, but at night it was cold, and there was no way she can get warm dressed only in a miniskirt. After the fourth day, and now half-starved, she suddenly heard the sound of a king vulture, which she'd learned about at her parents' research station. But it was not a sound that was pleasurable to her ears, as she knew that king vultures ate carrion, and if there were carrion in the area, they must be feeding on bodies from the plane crash. A short time later, she came upon a bench seat with 3 deceased passengers still sitting in them, and became paralysed with fear, as it was the first time she'd seen a deceased person. She feared that one of them was her mother, and proceeded to poke her with a stick, but of course she got no response, and then could see that the woman had her toenails painted, and that her mother never painted her toenails, and felt relieved. Julian had now spent 10 days walking in the jungle, and was now finding it hard to walk, and found herself staggering along the edge of a large river, and felt more lonely than at any time in her life, and believed she was miles away from any human soul. She then came upon a large boat, and initially believed she was hallucinating, but as she approached it, realised it was real. She then spotted a small path that led to a hut with a palm leaf roof. Inside the hut was an outboard motor and kerosene. A wound on her upper arm had become infested with maggots, and she remembered her father telling her that placing kerosene on the wound would get rid of the maggots, and as she poured over the kerosene, she winced with pain, but managed to extract about 30 maggots. She spent the night in the hut, and the following day she was awoken by the sound of men's voices outside the hut, and she said it was like hearing the voices of angels. As Julian appeared to the men, they looked shocked and fell silent. At first, they believed she was a kind of water goddess, a figure from a local legend that is a hybrid of a water dolphin and a blonde, white-skinned woman. Julian was able to introduce herself in Spanish and told them what had happened. The men then treated her wounds, fed her, and took her back to civilization. The next day, she was reunited with her father, where initially nothing was said, and they just held each other. On the January the 12th, 1972, they had located her mother, and like Julianne, had survived the crash, but later passed after a few days from her injuries, as she was unable to move. Julianne then learned more about the plane crash, where after a severe lightning strike, had broken into pieces about 2 miles above the ground, and she had survived a 2-mile fall into a thick jungle. It appears that the impact may have been lessened further by a thunderstorm updraft plus the thick foliage where she landed. Julian Koepke was the only survivor and suffered from nightmares for many years, and grieved over her mother's passing and suffered from survivor's guilt. Koepke later moved to Germany, where she made a full recovery from her injuries. She studied biology and graduated in 1980. She later returned to Peru and specialised in bats, and in 1987 she published a thesis. Today she works as a librarian at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology in Munich. In 2011 she released an autobiography titled When I Fell from the Sky, where she received a literature prize, and in 2019 the government of Peru awarded her the Order of Merit for Distinguished Services in the degree of Grand Officer.